I ended a 4-year relationship in a single conversation, and somehow, I'm the one being called heartless. Tell me this. If the person you love suddenly wants a completely different life than the one you both promised each other, do you stay and slowly break yourself? Or do you walk away and lose them instantly? Because what no one sees is that I didn't just lose a girlfriend that day. I lost the future I had already started building in my head. We had been together for 4 years. 4 years of routines, inside jokes, late night talks about nothing and everything, and the quiet kind of comfort that makes you believe you've found your person. We weren't one of those chaotic couples. We didn't scream at each other, didn't have dramatic breakups and makeups. We were steady, predictable even. And I mean that in the best way. 2 years into the relationship, we moved in together in a small apartment just outside the city. It felt like the natural next step, splitting rent, grocery shopping together, arguing about what show to watch before falling asleep on the couch. It all just fit. People around us would joke that we were basically already married. And honestly, I thought we were heading there. Early on, like really early, we had one of those big conversations. The kind most couples avoid because it feels too serious too soon. But we didn't avoid it. We leaned into it. We talked about everything. Where we wanted to live, what kind of life we imagined, what mattered to us. And then the topic of kids came up. I remember that moment clearly. We were sitting on our bed, sunlight coming through the window, everything feeling calm and certain. When I said I wanted kids someday, I wasn't nervous. I wasn't testing the waters. I was just stating a truth about myself. And she smiled. She said she wanted that too. It wasn't some dramatic declaration. It was simple, easy. Like we had just checked off another box that confirmed, yeah, we're on the same page. And from that point on, I carried that belief with me. Quietly. Constantly. I didn't think about it every day, but it was always there in the background. This shared future. A house in the suburbs, maybe a dog first, then kids, teaching them how to ride a bike, helping with homework, weekend soccer games, that kind of life. It wasn't just a dream, it was a plan. So when she sat me down a few months ago and told me she had something important to talk about, I had no idea that everything was about to shift. She looked nervous but not unsure. That's the part that stuck with me the most. She wasn't confused. She wasn't asking for help figuring something out. She had already figured it out. She told me she didn't want children anymore. At first, I thought I misunderstood her. Like maybe she meant not right now, or not for a long time. But no, she was very clear. She said she had been thinking about it for a while. That she didn't feel comfortable bringing children into this world. That it didn't feel right to her anymore. And the way she said it, it wasn't emotional. It wasn't impulsive. It was calm, thought out, final. I didn't get angry. I didn't raise my voice. I just sat there. Because in that moment, I realized this wasn't a disagreement. It wasn't something we could compromise on, like where to live or how to spend money. This was one of those things that either aligns or it doesn't. We talked for a long time that night, hours probably, going in circles, trying to understand each other without pushing too hard. I asked her if she was sure. She said yes. I asked if this was something she thought might change again in the future. She said she didn't think so. At some point, I brought up adoption. Not as a loophole, not as a way to win the conversation, but because to me, wanting kids has never been about biology. It's about raising them, being there, building a family. But she shut that down too. She said she didn't want to raise children at all. And that's when it really hit me. This wasn't a small shift. This wasn't something we could adjust around. This was a completely different life. I remember sitting there, looking at her, and feeling this weird mix of love and distance. Like she was still the same person I cared about deeply, but at the same time, she had just stepped onto a path I couldn't follow. And I think she saw it on my face, because that's when she started to get emotional. Not defensive, not angry yet, just scared. She asked me what I was thinking, and I told her the truth. I said I respected her decision, completely, that she had every right to choose what kind of life she wanted. But I also told her I couldn't give up having kids. Even saying it out loud felt heavy. Like I was choosing something abstract, something that didn't even exist yet, over the very real person sitting in front of me. But it wasn't that simple, because to me, it wasn't just having kids. It was the life I had always envisioned. The kind of future that gave everything else meaning. And I knew myself well enough to understand something else, too. Something I think a lot of people don't want to admit. If I stayed, I would either spend years hoping she'd change her mind, or I'd slowly start to resent her for not doing so. And neither of those options were fair to her, or to me. So I told her we shouldn't stay together. The moment the words left my mouth, everything changed. She looked at me like I had just said something completely unbelievable, like I had just erased 4 years of our lives with a single sentence. And then the tears came. Not quiet ones either. It was raw. Hurt. The kind that makes you question everything you thought was solid. She asked me how I could do this so quickly, how I could just decide to end things like that. She said if I really loved her, I would try to make it work, that I wouldn't just walk away. And I get why she felt that way. I really do. From her perspective, nothing about us had changed except one decision. And to her, that decision didn't outweigh everything we had built. But from my perspective, it changed everything. I tried to explain that this wasn't me giving up on her. It was me refusing to build a future that I knew would make both of us unhappy. I told her I loved her too much to stay in a relationship where one of us would eventually feel like we sacrificed something fundamental. But the more I tried to explain, the more it sounded, at least to her, like I was choosing a hypothetical future over her. And maybe, in a way, I was. That night ended without any real resolution. Just distance, silence, and this heavy understanding that we had reached the end of something neither of us wanted to lose. We didn't yell, we didn't throw things, there was no dramatic scene. Just two people sitting in the same room, realizing they were no longer heading in the same direction. You know that feeling when something huge happens, but your surroundings don't match the weight of it? The sunlight still came through the window, the coffee machine still hummed, people outside were still going about their day like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. We moved around the apartment like strangers. Not hostile, just distant, careful. Like every word had to be measured so it wouldn't trigger something else. At one point, she asked me, "So, that's it?" And I didn't know how to answer that in a way that didn't sound cruel. Because what do you say? Yes, 4 years is over because of one conversation? It sounds cold when you put it like that. It sounds like I didn't value what we had. But the truth was, that conversation didn't erase the 4 years. It revealed something about the next 40. And that's what I couldn't ignore. We spent the next few days figuring out logistics. Who would move out, what to do with the furniture, how to split everything we had built together. It felt transactional, almost clinical, which somehow made it worse, because every object had a memory attached to it. The couch we picked out together after arguing for 2 hours in the store. The mugs we bought on a random weekend trip. Even stupid things, like a blanket we fought over every night. And now we were just dividing it up. She cried a lot during those days. Sometimes quietly, sometimes in bursts that seemed to come out of nowhere. I didn't blame her. Honestly, I felt like I should have been crying more than I was. But I wasn't. I felt heavy, sure. Sad, absolutely. But there was also this strange sense of clarity. Like I knew, deep down, that this was the right decision, even if it hurt. And that made me feel like a terrible person. Because how could I be so certain? How could I not be fighting harder to keep us together? Those questions didn't just come from her. They came from other people too. At first, we kept things private, just the two of us dealing with it. But eventually, it got out. Friends started asking questions. Mutual friends started picking sides, whether they meant to or not. And that's when things got complicated. Some people were supportive. They understood that this wasn't about a petty argument or a temporary issue. They saw it for what it was. Two people realizing they wanted fundamentally different lives. But others didn't see it that way at all. I started hearing things. Not directly at first, just through conversations, subtle comments The kind of stuff that gets passed around in friend groups. She can't believe he ended it just like that. He didn't even try to work through it. If he really loved her, he would have stayed. And then it got more direct. One of our mutual friends, someone I actually respect a lot, sat me down and said something that stuck with me. He said, "It feels like you threw her away like garbage." I remember just staring at him, trying to process that. Because in my head, I had done the opposite. I had respected her enough to not drag her into a future where she'd feel pressured to change. But from the outside, it didn't look like that. It looked like I gave up. And I get it. I really do. From their perspective, relationships are about compromise, right? About adjusting, adapting, making things work, even when it's hard. But what happens when the thing you have to compromise on is something you can't actually compromise on? You can't have half a child. You can't raise a kid halfway. You either build that life or you don't. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized something that honestly scared me. If I had stayed, I wouldn't have been doing it out of love. I would have been doing it out of fear. Fear of losing her. Fear of starting over. Fear of being alone again after building a life with someone for so long. And that kind of fear, it doesn't build healthy relationships. It builds quiet resentment. I started imagining what our life would look like 5, 10 years down the line if I stayed. Maybe at first things would be okay. We'd convince ourselves that love was enough, that we could redefine what happiness looks like. But then what? What happens when friends start having kids? What happens at family gatherings when people ask, "So, when are you two planning to start a family?" What happens when I see a father teaching his kid how to ride a bike and I feel that ache in my chest? Would I really be okay with that? Or would I start to look at her, someone I love, and feel this quiet, growing resentment for a choice she had every right to make? And on her side, what would she feel? Would she feel guilty? Pressured? Like she was holding me back from the life I wanted? That's not love. That's two people slowly suffocating under unspoken expectations. So when people told me I should have tried harder, I kept coming back to the same question. Tried what exactly? Tried to change your mind? Tried to ignore my own? Tried to pretend that something this big wouldn't eventually break us anyway? Because to me, staying would have been the easy choice in the short term, and the most painful one in the long term. Still, the voices got to me. I won't lie about that. There were nights where I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything, wondering if I had been too quick, too decisive, too cold. I started questioning myself in ways I hadn't before. What if they're right? What if love is supposed to be enough? What if I walked away from something real because I was too rigid about a future that isn't even guaranteed? And then there was her. We didn't cut contact immediately. It wasn't that kind of breakup. There was no betrayal, no anger at the core, just pain. We texted a few times after, mostly logistical things at first, but then emotional ones. One night, she sent me a message that I still think about. She said, "I just don't understand how you can stop choosing me." That line hit hard because in her mind, love was a choice, something you commit to, even when things change. And in a way, she's right. But what she didn't see was that I wasn't choosing to stop loving her. I was choosing to stop building a future that didn't align with who I am. And those are two very different things. I tried to explain that to her, that this wasn't about loving her less, that if anything, it was because I loved her enough to not ask her to become someone she's not. But words like that, they don't always land the way you intend them to. Sometimes, they just sound like excuses. Eventually, the messages slowed down, then stopped. And just like that, someone who had been a constant in my life for 4 years became a memory. The silence after that was the hardest part. Not the breakup itself, not the arguments, not the opinions from friends, not even the moment I walked out of that apartment for the last time. It was what came after. Because when you remove someone who's been part of your daily life for years, you don't just lose the person, you lose the rhythm of your life. I'd wake up and instinctively reach for my phone, half expecting a good morning text that wasn't there anymore. I'd see something funny and think, she'd love this, before remembering, she's not part of my world anymore. Even small things like cooking dinner felt different. I used to cook for two without thinking. Now I'd catch myself making too much food, like some part of me hadn't caught up yet. And it's in those moments, the quiet ones, that doubt creeps in. Because when you're alone, there's no one else's voice to compete with your own. And mine started asking questions I couldn't ignore. Did I give up too easily? Did I choose a future over a person who is right in front of me? Did I just walk away from the best relationship I'll ever have over something that might not even matter as much as I think? Those thoughts didn't come all at once. They built slowly, quietly, like water seeping into cracks. And the more I sat with them, the more complicated everything felt. Because here's the truth no one really talks about. You can make the right decision and still feel like you made a mistake. I missed her. Not just in a vague, nostalgic way, but in a real, physical sense. Her presence, her voice, the way she'd look at me when I said something stupid. And missing her made everything harder. Because it blurred the line between what I felt and what I knew. What I felt was simple. I loved her and I wanted her back. But what I knew was more complicated. I knew that if I went back, nothing about the core issue would change. We'd still be two people who wanted different lives. And that's when something shifted for me. It wasn't a dramatic realization. It didn't happen in some big emotional moment. It was quieter than that. I was at a park one afternoon, just sitting there, trying to clear my head. And there was this kid nearby, maybe 5 or 6 years old, learning how to ride a bike. His dad was running alongside him, holding on to the back of a seat. The kid kept wobbling, almost falling, but the dad stayed right there, steady, patient. And then at one point, the dad let go. The kid didn't even realize it at first. He just kept going. And when he finally did realize, he looked back with this huge smile, like he had just discovered something amazing. And I don't know why, but watching that hit me harder than anything else had. Because in that moment, it wasn't abstract anymore. It wasn't just having kids as a concept. It was that exact moment, that feeling of being there for someone, of guiding them, of watching them grow and succeed in ways you helped shape. And I realized that's not something I could let go of. Not because society expects it, not because it's the normal path, but because it's something I genuinely want, deeply. And once I admitted that to myself, without guilt, without trying to downplay it, everything else started to make more sense. I didn't leave her because I didn't love her enough. I left because I knew that loving her wasn't enough to erase something fundamental about who I am. And honestly, I think that's the part people struggle to accept. Because it's easier to believe that love should conquer everything. That if two people care about each other enough, they can work through anything. But some things aren't obstacles. They're directions. And if those directions don't match, no amount of love can keep you walking the same path forever. I started to see our relationship differently after that. Not as something that failed, but as something that ran its course. We had 4 good years. Real years. Meaningful ones. And just because it didn't last forever, doesn't mean it wasn't worth it. If anything, it made me realize what I value even more clearly. Still, that didn't make the outside noise go away. Friends still had opinions. Some softened over time, especially when they saw that I wasn't out partying or moving on like nothing happened. That I was actually taking it seriously. But others held on to their views. That I was too rigid. That I prioritized an idea over a person. That I didn't fight hard enough. And for a while, I kept trying to defend myself, explain my reasoning, justify my decision. But eventually, I got tired. Because no explanation ever fully landed. And that's when I realized something else. Not everyone is going to understand your decisions, especially when they involve things they don't value the same way you do. And that's okay. Because at the end of the day, they're not the ones who have to live your life. You are. So I stopped trying to convince people. I stopped replaying conversations in my head, thinking of better ways I could have explained myself. And instead, I started focusing on something simpler. Living with the decision I made. Owning it. Not in a defensive way. Not in a, I'm right, everyone else is wrong kind of way. But in a quiet, steady way. Like, this is my life. These are my values. And I'm going to build something that aligns with them. Do I still miss her? Yeah. There are days when it hits harder than others. But I don't regret the decision anymore. Because regret would mean I believe there was a version of this where we both got what we wanted, and I don't think that version exists. Time didn't fix everything. That's something people like to say, right? Give it time. Like time is this magic solution that slowly erases pain and replaces it with clarity. But that's not really how it works. Time doesn't fix things. It just gives you space to understand them. And over time, I started to see things I couldn't see before. Not just about her, about myself, about what I actually believe love is and what it isn't. Because for a while, I kept circling back to the same question that everyone else seemed to be asking me. If you really loved her, why didn't you stay? And I used to struggle with that. I used to think maybe I was missing something. Maybe I didn't understand love the way other people did. Maybe I was too logical, too rigid, too focused on the future. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something that changed everything for me. Staying isn't always love. Sometimes, staying is fear. Sometimes it's comfort. Sometimes it's the inability to let go of something familiar, even when you know it's not right anymore. And leaving can actually be the harder, more honest form of love. Because leaving meant I wasn't asking her to change who she had become. It meant I wasn't trying to convince her that her decision was wrong, just so I could keep what we had. It meant I respected her enough to accept her as she is, even if that version of her didn't fit into the life I wanted. And I think that's the part people overlook. They see the ending, but they don't see the intention behind it. They don't see the nights I spent sitting with that decision before I said it out loud. They don't see how much it hurt to say, I can't do this, when every part of me wanted to stay. They just see the outcome. And outcomes are easy to judge when you're not the one living through them. A few months after the breakup, I ran into her. It wasn't planned, just one of those random moments that life throws at you when you least expect it. We were both at a cafe we used to go to all the time. For a second, it felt like nothing had changed. She looked the same. Same way of standing, same way of holding her coffee, same presence that used to feel like home. And then, reality settled in. We said hi. It was polite, careful. There was no anger, no bitterness, just this quiet understanding that we were no longer part of each other's lives. We sat down for a few minutes, talked about surface level things, work, life, the usual. And then, at one point, she looked at me and said something I didn't expect. She said, I think I understand now, a little more. I didn't respond right away. I just let her continue. She told me that at first, she thought I had chosen something imaginary over something real, that I had walked away from love too easily. But over time, she started to realize that what she had asked of me, staying and giving up something that mattered deeply to me, wasn't as simple as she thought. She said she still didn't agree with my decision, but she didn't see it as heartless anymore. And hearing that, it didn't feel like validation. It felt like closure. Not the kind where everything suddenly feels okay, but the kind where you can finally breathe without that constant weight on your chest. We didn't hug when we left. It wasn't that kind of moment. But there was something unspoken there. Something like mutual respect. Like we both finally understood that what happened between us wasn't about someone being right or wrong. It was about two people growing in different directions. After that, things felt lighter. Not perfect. Not easy. But clearer. I stopped asking myself if I was the villain in someone else's story. Because the truth is, in situations like this, there isn't always a villain. Sometimes it's just life forcing a choice that hurts no matter what you do. And if you're honest about it, if you handle it with respect, even when it's hard, that's the best you can do. So if you're listening to this and you're in a situation like mine, where love is there, but your paths don't align, ask yourself this. Are you staying because it's right or because it's easier? And if you had to live with that decision for the next 10, 20, 30 years, would you be at peace with it? Because love isn't just about holding on. Sometimes it's about knowing when to let go. And yeah, maybe some people will still think I was wrong. Maybe some people will always believe I should have stayed, should have tried harder, should have chosen differently. But they're not the ones who have to wake up every day and live with that choice. I am. And now, I can finally say this with honesty. I didn't leave because I didn't love her. I left because I understood what love could and couldn't fix. And if you were in my position, what would you have done? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. And if stories like this, real, complicated, messy situations, make you think a little deeper about relationships and choices, consider subscribing. Because sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that shape us the most.